first cast. So what you can do is throw right on top and just squirt it across like this. You gotta go kind of quick though. You know what I mean? You gotta let it sit. Got it! First cast.
What is up, you guys? I'm really excited about today's episode. This is something I've been wanting to put together for quite some time, but I wanted to get a decent amount of footage to show you before I try to describe this technique in detail. Before I get started though, real quick disclaimer, I did not create this technique. I did not invent it. I am not trying to say that at all. I'm sure that some of you watching this have probably used a similar technique, and I guarantee you there's bass anglers across the country that use a very similar technique. So again, did not create this or invent this. It's just a newer technique to me because I had never seen anybody use it around here in southern Wisconsin. It is something that I kind of developed and started doing about 6 years ago. So here we go, let's get down to it. So what is slop top bassin'? What do I mean by slop top? As I'm about to kill a squirrel, look out homie. Man, I legit almost just lit up a squirrel. What is slop top? First, let me say what it is not, okay? I am not talking about lily pads. I am not talking about weeds that are attached to the bottom that are growing to the surface. I am not talking about grass that is growing from the bottom to the surface, reeds, anything like that, okay? So if you're thinking about frog fishing or reed fishing with, you know, topwater baits, buzz baits and whatnot, that is not what I'm about to discuss with you, okay? This is slightly different. What I mean by slop top is a variety of different conditions. Sometimes they can all be mixed together, but essentially this is not anything that is rooted or growing from the bottom of the lake, okay? What you have is bottom, open water, and then what I call slop top, something that's floating on the surface only about an inch thick. Slop top, according to me, can consist of either dead weeds, dead grass, other debris that is left over from the previous day, okay? So from recreational boaters, fishing boats, driving around the lake all day, chopping up the weeds and the grass. Overnight, while that stuff settles, it kind of gets blown in, it kind of floats into the shoreline, and what you'll get when you walk up or when you pull up in your boat in shallow water is you'll see these mats of floating slop, okay? So it's just a bunch of dead garbage, a bunch of debris, just a mess. A lot of times you will also see, you know, sometimes like sticks and branches and whatnot, if a storm has come through. I've noticed a lot of guys on YouTube, some of the videos I follow, a lot of times when the water's high on rivers or reservoirs, it's what's called being blown out. When the water is blown out, when the lake's blown out, when the river is blown out, really shallow, you get all this debris, all this junk floating. I would also call that slop top. Okay, so that's the first category. The first condition is just a combination of debris, grass, weeds, branches, you name it. The second one is algae blooms. Okay, so really, really bad, really thick, nasty algae blooms. They can be green, they can be kind of brown, but basically the water is like soup or chocolate milk, and there's essentially no visibility. You know, you might have an inch of visibility at best, but you just see all these little algae, these little particles just all over the place, super thick and shallow, and it looks like it's not fishable. However, often when you have these really bad algae blooms and shallow, the bass are hanging out in there and you can get them to go using this technique. The third condition or category is foam. A lot of time when you have windy days, a lot of waves, the water crashing up on the shore, it will create foam, almost like clouds on top of the water. It looks pretty cool. It's like a big old bubble bath, but the bass will hang out in that stuff underneath it. The fourth category is what some call cheese, okay? I've never fished cheese myself, but seeing videos, seeing other guys fish it, I know that this technique, slop top bassin', would definitely work on the cheese, okay? So you got debris, grass, weeds, all that good stuff. You've got algae blooms, you've got foam, and you've got the cheese, okay? So you can have one of these conditions, one of these categories, you can have a combination of all of them. But what's going on, you guys, with slop top is that the bass obviously are underneath it using it as cover, okay? To you, it looks like garbage, it looks like crap, it looks like it's not fishable, it looks like a waste of time. But to the bass, all they know is that they can get underneath it, it provides cover, and more importantly, what I have found over the years sight fishing from shore is that inside of this slop, whatever it is, even if it's a combination of all four categories, what you have is all these little bait fish, sometimes little bluegill, but they're in this stuff feeding, picking off whatever they are. They're eating something off of it, but obviously the bait fish come in to feed on the slop, the big bass come in behind them, and they come in to eat the bait fish. So that's why they're there. It's cover, it's ambush. One component, the one factor that is really important, that really makes a big difference with any of these categories, If you have this component, I'm telling you, you need to fish it. And that component, that factor is walls. Walls, walls, walls. If you have retaining walls, cement walls, you guys that bass fish a lot, you've probably seen them on a lot of your lakes in your hometown or wherever you fish. But if there is any type of wall that is the shoreline, it makes up the shoreline, it's coming out of the water, you really need to invest some time fishing it, casting it, especially if you have slop top. But real quick, I'm gonna show you guys a clip, give you some action to watch, and when we get back, we will talk more about slop top bassing. In this clip, I am using a creature bait on a Texas rig setup, skimming across some slop, and the slop top in this clip is actually a combination of some dead weeds and some algae. So enjoy, and we'll be right back. Fighting like you're big, it's all them weeds. Look at that, you guys. Gotta get going to work here. I wanted to try to catch one before I went in, and I did. That's cool. He was in some thick stuff. Bigger than I thought. It's a nice fish, about 18 inches. Yeah, cool, huh? It's about a 3-pounder. All right, you guys, so as I just mentioned, I was using a Texas rig setup with a creature bait, and that is basically all you need to do slop top bassing is a Texas rig hook with really any type of bait or lure that you want to use, whether it be a creature bait, whether it be a lizard, whether it be a worm. I don't know, I'm running out of options here, but it doesn't really matter what, as long as it is a Texas rig and it is light and it is easy to skim across the top of the slop without it falling through, because the slop is usually not more than about 1 inch thick. Sometimes it's even less. A lot of the times there's gaps and holes in the slop, and you don't really want your bait to fall through. Now I know some of you are probably thinking, well, what about punching? Obviously this technique is not about punching, and I am not against punching. I think it's a great technique. However, when these fish are stacked up really shallow under slop top, often you'll find that the best approach and technique to use is on the top, okay? Moving it quick, skim it across the top of the slop. You're just going for a reaction strike. They're usually gonna hit it pretty hard, and you're usually gonna get a good hook in them. So not against punching at all, but what I usually do in these situations when I find slop top shallow is I probably throw about 3 to 5 casts on top first to see if I can get a reaction strike. And obviously topwater fishing is always fun. But if that does not work, then I will cast back with either a different bait or just put a weight on, and I'll let my bait fall through, and I'll kind of try to work it on the bottom as opposed to on top. But obviously for this technique, specifically slop top bassing, the lighter the better. So go Texas rig, no weight, and any type of soft plastic you want to use. All right, you guys, real quick, I'm parked just so I can kind of show you what I generally use for slop top bassing. We got a Zoom lizard here on a Texas rig. We got a worm on a Texas rig, pretty standard, pretty traditional. And this is the actual hook size that I'm usually using. And this is a 3/0 Texas rig hook, okay? 3/0. Now I know some of you are probably thinking, wow, 3/0's kind of small. Should you go bigger? I have found that this is the perfect size. It's the right size. It's light enough. You saw the baits there. They're really lean and light. You can really skim them across. What's nice about having a light hook and a lighter bait is that sometimes the fish want it fast on the slop top, but other times it can be similar to frog fishing, and sometimes they want it on the paws. So what I usually do is I'll throw 2 or 3 casts, basically skimming it across the top, a constant retrieve, medium fast retrieve, and I'm twitching it and bouncing it. You'll see in a few more of these clips how I'm working it. But usually I start with speed, again, to see if I can get that reaction strike, to see if they can just hit it hard and fast. It's a lot more fun that way. But if I don't get a hit on the first 2 or 3 casts, I'll throw 1 or 2 more back and I'll do twitches and pauses. Okay, so just like a frog, I'll move it a couple inches, a foot or so, and then I'll stop and I'll pause, count to 10 in my head, maybe 15, move it again. I'll give it a couple twitches and pops, pause it. And a lot of time when I do this, similar to frog fishing, you give it 2 or 3 pops and you pause it, and usually they'll hit it on the pause or right when you twitch it to get it moving again. As soon as it moves after a pause, sometimes they'll blow up on it. So having a light hook, having a light lure is gonna give you the ability to not only fish it however you want and change the speed up if you need to, but you can literally pause it and let it hang and sit on top of that slop without it falling through. Okay, so it's very effective, gives you the ability to become very versatile. But real quick, let's cut to another clip, you guys, give you some more action. In this clip, I'm using a creature bait again on a Texas rig, and the slop in this clip is basically just dead weeds and a little bit of grass mixed in. And this one I'm skimming it across pretty quick, and really nice, again, probably 3+ pound largemouth crushes it and eats it and puts up a really good fight. And then the clip after that, I'm gonna show you another one, is actually, this is probably the smallest bass I have ever caught slop top bassing. In fact, I'm like 99% sure it is. This is about a 16 to 17 inch smallmouth bass. I rarely catch anything under 3 pounds. I'm just telling you, I mean, that's a fact. I rarely catch anything under 3 pounds when I'm slop top bassing. Now, using this technique, you guys, it will obviously increase your numbers. You're gonna catch more bass in general, but really pay attention if you try this out. I'm very confident that you're gonna not just catch more bass, but you're going to start hooking bigger bass. Whatever it is, I don't know if it's the cover aspect, I don't know if it's because there's so many bait fish in the slop, I don't know if it's because it's shallow, I don't know what's going on, but they're generally tends to be bigger fish under the slop, and that's why this is such a great technique to use, because you can actually target bigger fish on purpose. So enjoy this clip. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about slop top bassing. Second cast, you guys. Second cast. There's more in here. And it's a smallie too. That's sick. Oh, there's a bunch of them in here, you guys. There's a bunch of them in here. I saw 2 more with him. Gosh, there's a huge one with him. There's a huge one with him. Jeez, there's a monster in here, you guys. There's an absolute monster. Jeez. You guys, this one's about 17, maybe 18 inches. And there was like a 21-incher chasing him. You gotta be kidding me. Oh, he ate it. He ate it. Jeez, bro.
Slop top fishing, you guys. Alright, you guys, second cast. First fish of the morning. About a 17 inch smallmouth. Pretty little fish. Pretty fish. Let her go. Alright, you guys, so what I did, I should say why I did what I did. I'm doing slop top fishing here again. And the reason is that yesterday was a weekend, it was Sunday, and there were hundreds of boats out here. And you can't really see it right now because it's still a little too dark, but there's a bunch of floating crap in here, just chopped up weeds from all the boats yesterday, from all the speed boats and the jet skis and whatnot. So you got all this floating slop in here, just junk, just dead crap. And I just had a feeling there'd be bass underneath it, so that was only my second cast. Got a nice little smallmouth.
Now this clip, you guys, you're about to see is the epitome of slop top bassing. I mean, this is it. If I could use one scenario, one clip, and one fish all in one shot, it would be this footage I'm about to show you. This is some serious slop top. This is after a weekend. This is after a lot of recreational boaters. Hundreds of boats were on the lake, just chopping the lake up, turning it into, you know, slop salad. And overnight it floated into the shoreline. It's probably a good 10 yards from the shoreline out, and it's thick. It's probably at least an inch, if not 2 inches thick of just grass and dead weeds. There's bottles in it, there's garbage, there's other debris, just all kinds of nonsense in this slop. And it almost doesn't look fishable. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get the hit. I wish I would have turned my camera on sooner, but I was actually about to leave on this particular morning, and I was walking out of my spot, and I noticed how thick the slop was, and I'm like, man, there's got to be something underneath this stuff. So I put all my gear down, I threw out a Texas rig with a worm, and this fish blew up on it. And it's funny because it was so thick, and I had so many weeds and grass on my line, I couldn't even feel the fish anymore, and I really thought, I was like convinced I lost the fish. But watch the clip, enjoy. It's a really nice bass and some serious thick slop. This is the epitome of slop top bassing. And when we come back, we will talk more about my rod setup and the line that I'm actually using when I'm slop top bassing.
Hooked this fish in a mess of slop, and I thought I lost him, but he's still there. Holy cow, that is a toad. Hey guys, 5-pounder. That fish was under all this slop right here. I was just about to switch spots, but I had a feeling there was a fish underneath this. And whenever you see this floating crap, you guys don't be afraid to cast it. I know it looks like junk, but I can't tell you how many big bass I've caught throwing a Texas rig of any sort. Doesn't really matter what you have on there, but just do a Texas rig because you can walk it right across all of this.
All right, so rod and line setup. What am I using? Most of the time, I prefer to use an open face reel and rod setup or combo. I use a 6.5 foot medium action rod which is light for a reason. The reason why you want a lighter rod with a little bit of give is because you need the fish to be able to get the bait and take it and pull it under, okay? So if you have a stiff rod or a heavy rod, what's gonna happen is you're gonna pull the bait out of the fish's mouth and you're not gonna get hooks into it, okay? So definitely use a lighter rod if you can. Medium heavy is probably okay, but I've done very well with the medium action rod. And for my line, I'm using, again, on that open face reel, 10-pound braid, but the last 18 to 24 inches is homemade fluorocarbon leader. And I do that so that there is some give and stretch in my line when the fish hits, so the fish can grab it, pull it under, get the whole bait in its mouth. You don't really need to set the hook on this type of setup on this presentation. When you're slop top bassing, you know, that's why you're using a smaller hook, that's why you're using a lighter bait, that's why you're using a lighter rod, lighter line, everything, because the idea is to let the fish get the bait, pull it down under, get the whole thing in its mouth. And so you're not really setting the hook, you're just kind of pulling your rod to the side or lifting it straight up, and the fish is basically hooking itself from the hit alone. And so what ends up happening 9 times out of 10 is you'll see the hook is in the top lip or in the top corner, which is where you want it. It's very hard for a fish to spit the hooks when it's in that area. So that's what I usually use. However, you traditional bass guys, you want a little more security, you want a little bit stronger rod or line, you can definitely use a bait caster. My recommendation with the bait caster, again though, is for the bait cast rod, I wouldn't go longer than 7 feet. And I mean, you could probably do a 7.5 foot rod, but what I'd pay more attention to is the heaviness of the rod. I would probably use a medium action rod. Again, I would not go heavier than a medium heavy. That's probably too much rod at that point. And then instead of using braided line on this setup though, if you're gonna use a bait caster, I would actually opt to use probably 15-pound mono or fluorocarbon, okay? That'll make it a little bit easier to cast. It'll give you the stretch and give you need. It'll also give you enough strength to hook set into the fish and to land the fish. 12-pound mono or fluorocarbon is probably the sweet spot, but I can understand if you want to go a little bit heavier just to have a little more security so you don't have to worry about losing the fish or it breaking you off. But that's what I would recommend if you're going to do a bait cast setup. Medium action rod, 12 to 15-pound mono or fluorocarbon should do the trick. Like I said though, I am almost always using an open face rod and reel setup with 10-pound braid and 10-pound fluorocarbon leaders that I make myself. So why am I saying not to use more than 15-pound mono or fluorocarbon on your bait cast setup? It's not that you can't, but the heavier you go with the line, you guys, the more likely it's going to be that you pull the bait out of the fish's mouth, okay? That heavier line, that stronger line, you lose the sensitivity, you lose touch, you lose feel. And sometimes with this slop top bass, and you guys, they don't always crush it. A lot of times they just kind of pop it and slurp it. And if you have that heavier, stronger, thicker line, a lot of times they're not going to be able to get it and pull it down and in. You might not even feel the slurp, you know, when they just come up and slurp it and pop it real quick. You might hear it or you might even see it, but I guarantee you, you're going to miss more fish the heavier you go with your line. So I wouldn't go too heavy. You could probably even get away with 20-pound. I wouldn't do that. I would not go higher than 15-pound. But trust me, if you try this out, if you test it out, experiment, you're going to see why real quick it's smarter to go lighter, okay? Now with my open face reel setup, you're probably wondering, well, why do I use braided line then at all? And the reason why I do that is because I am going on a lighter rod and lighter line. I need some strength, I need some backup, I need some security. And when you're slop top fishing, a lot of the time, not only are you hooking bigger fish, but you get a mess of weeds and slop on your line on top of the weight of the fish. And so I use the braid because braided line is much stronger and it does have some give and stretch to it. But if I hook a big bass and I get about a pound or two of weeds on top of it, that braid gives me the confidence and the security to know that it's not gonna, it's almost impossible for it to break the braided line just from the weight or the fight alone. You know, a 10-pound braided line really has a strength of like 20 to 25-pound mono. So that's why I use the braid for the strength and the security and the backup of the weight, so it can handle the weight of the fish along with the weeds and the slop on top of it. But then again, I add that fluorocarbon leader just so there's some stretch, some give, so I can make sure that fish gets that bait in its mouth. But real quick, let's get back to some action, you guys. In this next clip, this is probably my favorite footage all time thus far, slop top bassing. This fish just absolutely crushed my bait. The slop was a combination of some dead floating weeds and grass, as well as a really bad algae bloom. It's really cool because as you see the fish fight, if you look in the water, you can just see there's just algae everywhere. The water's like a really green. And as the fish fights and runs, my line is kind of cutting through the algae bloom and it kind of opens up the water. So you'll really be able to see that in this footage. And it's a really nice fish. It's one of the bigger bass I've caught in the last year, probably in the 5-pound range, over 20 inches long for sure. Just a really good fish. Again, just a prime example of the type of fish you can catch ultra shallow under the slop, burning a bait across the top. It's just hard to beat this type of topwater fishing. So enjoy, and we'll be right back. Second cast. Beauty. Second cast, you guys. And that is a toad. I'm out here before work. Look at that fish, you guys. That thing is over 4 pounds, pushing 5 for sure. Just slop top fishing, you guys. Get used to hearing me say that. Say it all the flipping time. Just burning a Texas rig. Oh man, burning a Texas rig over shallow water that's got a bunch of algae and just crap, just a bunch of junk in here. Just under 21. So what you can do is throw it right on top and just and scoot it across like this. You got to go kind of quick though. You know what I mean? You don't want to let it sink. Got him. First cast. Told you, dude. Get the net. Get the net. First cast. I told you it was going to happen, dude. He's not that big. There's bigger ones in here. Got him? See, all right, you guys, I got my buddy Eric here from my church, and I just was showing him how to work a bait, and I told him first cast, it'll probably happen, and I got one on the first cast, didn't I? Totally. Slop top fishing. It's a nice bass, yeah. He's almost 4 pounds. Isn't that cool? You see how that worked, though?
That is. That's perfect how you nailed it.
I was just explaining it to him, you guys. I was telling him what to do, and sure enough, these bass cooperated. Slop top fishing is one of my favorite techniques.
Worked exactly.
Yeah, it's probably 3.5 pounds, maybe 4. It's got a belly on it. It's a nice fish. Look at that thing, dude. I'm gonna have you take a picture real quick. Do you want to take one on your phone and send it to me?
So this last clip you're gonna see, guys, is just an absolute monster Wisconsin bass that I caught, slop top bass. And unfortunately, right as I set the hook on this fish, my GoPro battery died. I literally saw the hit, it just exploded on it. I lifted to the side to set the hook, and as soon as I set the hook, my GoPro went beep beep, and I knew right away it was shutting down. So that was very disappointing. I was just thinking to myself, great, biggest fish in a while, and I'm not gonna have footage. And it ended up being, so far in the last 12 months, it's my biggest bass. It was about 21.5 inches and right around 6.5 pounds. So just a giant toad bass. But I switched the batteries after I caught it and net it. I quickly switched my battery and my GoPro. So you're at least gonna see the fish. I got the release footage, and it was a really nice, healthy, fat Wisconsin bass. So that's a wrap, you guys. That is slop top bassing. Real quick recap. If you got debris from the previous day, chopped up weeds, grass, any of that stuff piled up on the shoreline creating a mat, or if you have an algae bloom or cheese or foam or all of the above, the one component you really want to look for is walls. Okay, don't forget to check walls and to fish them. But if you have any of those conditions, near a wall, shallow, and it looks like a bunch of slop, start casting it. Get a Texas rig on, twitch it over, burn it over, change up your retrieve till you get bit, because I'm sure you will. Like always, you guys, thanks for watching. Please hit the subscribe button, feel free to share, and just keep casting.